Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today at the discussion on the foundation of the US-India Strategic Plus Partnership. We are honored to have with us today the Ambassador of the United States to India, Ambassador Richard Verma, who would share his thoughts on bilateral relations, Mr. T.N. Nennen, Chairman Ananta Aspen Center and Chairman Business Standard, who will chair the discussion. We would also like to thank PepsiCo for their support to this program. Before I request Mr. Nennen to chair the session, I would request all of you to please put your mobile phones on silent mode. Mr. Nennen, please.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Verma to this interactive session with the Ananta Center. Ambassador Verma is an old friend, I think, of the Ananta Center and has been helpful in interactions in the past in Washington before he came here. And he's come as ambassador at a very interesting time in Indo-US relations. He also comes with a distinguished background. He was the highest ranking Indian American, I think, in the administration. He was the principal advisor to Secretary Clinton. He has served with distinction in the US Air Force, winning, I think, 3 different medals. He's a lawyer by training, doing his LLM with distinction, and he has worked on congressional committees. He has, in his law practice, focused on a lot of international issues, compliance. He's been active on Eastern Europe, and he's been recognized as one of the 50 most influential Indian Americans in the US by a leading community paper. So he's come to India when bilateral relations are on upswing. This relationship is unique in the sense that there is no other relationship which has the same multi-dimensional identity. It covers government to government, of course. It covers extensive business to business, and it also covers people to people in a way that no other bilateral relationship can claim. There is a depth and range of engagement between the two countries that also is unique. And some of the targets that are set for growth in trade and so on are ambitious. We have different perspectives on issues. One currently being engaged on is intellectual property rights. There are issues being dealt with on climate change, and I'm sure that Ambassador Verma will go into some of these and other issues. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome once again Ambassador Verma for being with us and to invite you to speak to the gathering. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's really a great honor to be here with Aspen, and I really thank you for hosting the Ananta Aspen Center, and Kiran in particular. I've known Kiran for about 15 years or so, maybe longer, when she was a very prominent voice and a prominent person in Washington, really doing such a great job on behalf of Indian companies. And we would see her walking the halls of Congress on a regular basis. It's a great professional and personal honor for me to be here as ambassador. I've been here about 4 months. I've traveled all over the country, made 13 different trips already, north to south, east to west. We've had probably half of the president's cabinet visit as well, in addition to the president himself. It makes for quite a busy schedule, I would say. And also, so professionally, it's been terrific. Personally, I would also say, to come back to the country that my parents immigrated from, where my brother and 3 sisters were born, is also a great honor for me. My dad tells a very classic kind of immigrant story of showing up in New York City with $24 and a bus ticket and not knowing anyone, and So to think that I could come back in this capacity 50 years later is, it's very long odds, but a very nice American story, I think. Over the years, my dad would remind me how connected we all were, and how no matter who we met who happened to be Indian, my dad would find some connection to them. From the same town, from the same school. That was my cousin, brother's, sister's, neighbor's friend. It didn't matter if we were riding in a taxi or met a CEO. My dad would always say, oh yeah, we're from the same town, we're from the same school. And finally I would say to my dad, I'd say, Dad, it's not mathematically possible for you to know every Indian person. There's over 1 billion Indian people. It's just not actually mathematically possible. He said, well, look, it's a very, very connected place. So in the fall of 2009, I was, fall of 2009, I was Assistant Secretary of State. And I was invited to the White House to meet the Prime Minister who was coming for a state visit, which was very exciting. I called my dad. I said, Dad, I got invited to meet the Prime Minister of India. This is great. He said, this is terrific news. You must tell him we're from the same place. And I said to my dad, I said, I'm actually not going to do that, principally because it's not true, and it's just not going to happen. He calls me the next day. He says, you're going to tell the Prime Minister, right? We're from the same town. We're from the same place. I said, Dad, I'm not going to tell the Prime Minister of India that you're from the same place. So the morning of the ceremony comes. I'm excited. I head to the White House. There's about 12 of us that had been gathered to greet the Prime Minister who had come, and were nervously waiting in the receiving line. I'm going through the line. The President sees me, and we had known each other from the Senate, and the President says, Mr. Prime Minister, this is Rich Verma. He's Assistant Secretary of State. Prime Minister looks at me from head to toe. He's looking from head to toe. He says, you're Indian. I said, yes, Mr. Prime Minister, I am. He says, where's your father from? I said, my father is from Jalandhar. Prime Minister turns to the President, says, his father and I are from the same place. Now, you hate it when your parents are right, and I particularly hated it in that situation, but that is exactly what occurred. It was a good recognition of how connected we all are. Look, I do appreciate the invitation to be here, and I look forward to your questions as well. And I know that speeches on the U.S.-India relationship usually start with a mention of our shared democratic values and then a long detail about our strategic agenda. I thought I would do it in the reverse today. I do want to talk about the strategic agenda, but I really want to focus on our shared democratic values and the personal ties in a little more depth, because we don't often get a chance to talk about that. And I do this because our official relationship is really only a byproduct of the values, history, and personal ties that we all share. And those ties are the relationship's body and soul, body and soul. And as India has shared with the West through the practice of yoga and other traditions, keeping the body and soul healthy requires constant introspection. And so with that in mind, I intend to spend my time not only here, but my time in India, not just discussing the next big strategic thing or where we're going, but also why we're going there. And I thought the Ananta Aspen Center, with its long tradition of open dialogue, was the perfect place to start that conversation. Before I begin, let me also, again, just extend our condolences from the U.S. government to the people of Nepal and to all those that were impacted by the terrible earthquake. And we continue to be inspired by India's quick and deep response to aid its neighbor during a time of great need. So just on to the bilateral relationship. I think it is fair to say the bilateral relationship is stronger and more vibrant than it has ever been. When our leaders first decided to cast off the chill of the Cold War and improve our relations, it was mostly due to the many convergent strategic interests of India and the United States. The bet was that the democratic values and deep personal ties our nation shared would lead us naturally toward a strong economic and strategic partnership. And today, there's no doubt we're seeing the benefits of that early strategic vision. The recent visits of the Prime Minister to the United States last September and President Obama to India this past January have re-energized a partnership that has been growing steadily for at least the last 15 years or so, even if for one reason or another it wasn't always growing as fast as we had hoped or as fast as it could. But one of the outcomes of the recent visits was also the recognition that our relationship is not solely about our strategic interests. It's about the trade, the academic, the scientific, and other unofficial ties that underlie the broad popular and political support that the relationship enjoys in both India and the United States. Our leaders, therefore, envisioned an enhanced relationship where we can utilize these ties to build the more peaceful, prosperous, and stable future we seek. Now, I call this enhanced relationship our Strategic Plus partnership. Strategic Plus. And in the aftermath of the high-level visits, we are now engaging on more than 70 initiatives, everything from space and cooperation on Mars to the deep oceans to vaccines. And I won't go into all the details of the past several months, but a short list includes launching the Civil Nuclear Contact Group that moved us past the obstacles that had stalled us for years, restarting our Trade Policy Forum to address intellectual property and food security issues, signing memoranda of cooperation on smart cities and transportation, and hosting the bilateral India-U.S. Technology Summit. These are just a few. I only mentioned 4 of very, very many different initiatives, but the President and Prime Minister also recognized convergences in our Asia policies. The U.S. rebalance to Asia, along with India's Act East policy. And we decided we were not examining and capitalizing on these convergences as much as we could. And so the President and Prime Minister issued a joint strategic vision for the Asia-Pacific and India Ocean region that I would say set the course forward in a new, groundbreaking direction. The vision statement articulates our common view that peace, prosperity, and stability in the Indo-Pacific region are secured on a bedrock of connected economies, freedom of navigation and trade, maritime security, a rules-based order, and an inclusive, effective governing architecture. So again, these are just a few examples of the accomplishments over the last several months, but I want to assure you we're not resting. Even though the excitement of the high-level visits has worn off for just a few days, it seems like we get a high-level visitor every week. The embassy, along with our partners at the MEA, and all who work on the official relationship are still moving ahead on all of our existing initiatives, and we're thinking constantly of new ways to engage. We're tracking our initiatives through a joint working group that I co-chair with the Foreign Secretary. Our Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs was here last week for Foreign Office consults to review progress on our initiatives, and this coincided with regional consultations between our Assistant Secretaries for South and Central Asia, Near East Asia, and Africa, and their MEA counterparts, something that we have not done for many years. These talks were also a demonstration that we are working together. We're still discussing issues, looking for common ground, and searching for additional ways to move forward across the globe. Now, I'd be happy to take questions about on the official relationship during the Q&A, but now I do want to turn to the subjects I mentioned earlier, the shared democratic values and people-to-people ties that are the bedrock upon which the relationship stands. They are the reason that for so many years, regardless of other world events, many U.S. and Indian leaders believe that the United States and India should be natural partners on the world stage. But this leads to the question, what exactly are the democratic values we share? And can we strengthen our shared understanding of them in a way that builds even more resiliency into our relationship, which is sure to face many tests over the years? I would submit that the first pillar of our shared democratic values surely is our shared belief in the importance of self-rule and in its offspring, fair and free elections. Everywhere in the world, as citizens united against oppression ultimately gain their freedom, they face a choice about the kind of government they want. The choice they make is rooted in their values. As we know, not all choose democracy. But when the people of India and the people of the United States gained their freedom, they designed liberal, representative democracies that put freedom of conscience and self-rule above all else. Our people both entered into social contracts with one another that said they would be governed by the same set of rules. They agreed to a rules-based systems that would be created by democratically elected representatives, enforced by accountable administrations, and interpreted by independent judiciaries. Now, their choices were not surprising. The American Revolution was steeped in the quest for liberty from tyranny. Our founding fathers sought a government that would be run by the people, for the people. American founding father Patrick Henry expressed this when he exclaimed, "Give me liberty or give me death." Over 100 years later, Lokmanya Tilak's declaration that, quote, "Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it," was a siren call for all in India who sought to end British rule. And as India's freedom came at midnight in 1947, Nehru reflected that her soul, long suppressed, had found its utterance. The similar histories of our founding eras make it clear that our two societies are ones that reject totalitarianism or authoritarianism in favor of giving every part of society a voice in government. And one way we exercise that voice is through elections. But democracy is about so much more than elections. It's also about constantly pushing our governments toward a better, more just, more enlightened expression of our values. To get there, free societies must engage in a constant and deliberate debate on topics of public concern. We cannot avoid hard questions in the name of political expediency. We cannot avoid discussions simply because we might not like the answers. For instance, communities in every part of the United States are engaged in a conversation today about race, about law enforcement, and the socioeconomic conditions that have caused too many neighborhoods to erupt in protest, and which sometimes can turn violent. If we seek to improve the fabric of our nation, we must be willing to engage in a vigorous exchange about our values, their meaning, and the direction of our communities. This belief in the value of debate about the direction of our societies is another democratic principle that we actually share. It is also one that our founders recognized. In America, the drafters of our Constitution explicitly limited our government's power to regulate freedom of expression in its many forms, including religion, speech, and association. In India, Dr. Ambedkar did similarly, calling for liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship in your Constitution's preamble. Now, before I move on, let me pause for a moment and mention a specific embassy program. Our mission is currently hosting an exhibition called Kindred Nations at the American Center, and this is an excellent display that examines the many personal linkages between the United States and India between 1783 and 1947. We brought some of the exhibition catalogs here today, but I'd also encourage you to go to the American Center and see it if you haven't already. Now, I bring up Kindred Nations now because one of the photographs that struck me was of Henry David Thoreau, the American author and philosopher. And according to the photo's inscription, Thoreau had read the Bhagavad Gita at Walden Pond, where he also wrote his most famous work. And according to the inscription, another of Thoreau's works, his essay on civil disobedience, was one of the inspirations for Mahatma Gandhi's passive resistance campaigns. Civil disobedience explains why Thoreau could not support a U.S. government that allowed slavery. Because government is a thing created by its citizens, he argued, the citizenry should be free to argue against laws deemed unjust and to disobey their enforcement by the government it created. Now, depending on how much of a student of political theory or philosophy you are, you might find it amusing that a government official, particularly an ambassador, would stand before you quoting this particular essay. But I do so because, like Thoreau, I believe in the inalienable right of citizens in a democratic society to argue peacefully for a government they believe is more just, more moral, and more reflective of their individual beliefs. This is the same right that found a manifestation in Gandhiji's satyagrahas in Africa and India. It was a right demonstrated by Martin Luther King as he fought against the injustices of segregation. It is a right still exercised in front of the White House and Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and it is a right still faithfully, regularly, and wonderfully expressed across India today. But Thoreau also recognizes that his will to dissent would not be so strong against injustices lesser than slavery, but the lack of a great injustice against which to fight does not mean that the quest for a better union has ended. There are always things that must and should change, whether it is by changing the laws or policies, challenging them in court, or by strengthening their enforcement. Those that act peacefully to seek change are not anti-government. They are for better government. And by seeking to improve government, they strengthen national security, not weaken it. Now, in today's world, a great deal of the search for the refinements that can improve our governments is undertaken by civil society organizations. They are fighting peacefully around the world for advances in health, inclusive economic growth, environmental protections, human rights, and to strengthen democracy. That's why President Obama convened members of the international community on the margins of the UN General Assembly in 2013 to launch the Stand with Civil Society agenda. This is a multi-year effort to accomplish the following objectives. One, to improve the policy environment for civil society organizations in various countries around the world. Second, to coordinate diplomatic actions in response to restrictions on civil society. And third, to develop innovative mechanisms for providing civil society organizations with technical and financial support. Now, both of our countries are home to vibrant and vocal civil society organizations seeking change in every conceivable area. India is home to a vibrant community of over 2 million legally registered non-governmental organizations. The United States also has a robust civil society community, though I doubt the number is 2 million. With so many voices engaged in the debate, there are sure to be some whose views others find objectionable. That is part of the beauty of the vibrant, thriving democracies chosen. Now, I read with some concern the recent press reports on challenges faced by NGOs operating in India. Because a vibrant civil society is so important to both of our democratic traditions, I do worry about the potentially chilling effects of these regulatory steps focused on NGOs. So while I'm in India, I hope to find many areas of agreement and forward progress with both my official and unofficial friends, but I also know there will be times when we disagree, and I look forward to those conversations too. Yes, I look forward to the tough discussions because my argument is not that our two sovereign countries must be exactly the same. Rather, it is a suggestion that our democratic traditions are strengthened when we use discussion and debate to improve. Therefore, we can build resilience in our bilateral relationship by having frank discussions on all matters of shared concern, including the importance of civil society and free expression to the promotion of a more peaceful, prosperous, and stable future. Now, we started this discussion last week during a highly successful think tank summit the embassy hosted with partners, the University of Pennsylvania, the Observer Research Foundation, and Brookings. This novel event brought together over 60 organizations from across India for 2 days to discuss the important role think tanks play in the democratic process. We also look forward to ways to strengthen the think tank community through capacity building, effective communication strategies, and outreach to both the public and to policymakers. Perhaps most importantly, the Think Tank Summit built or furthered personal ties between Indians and Americans that share a similar vision for what can be accomplished by working together. And this is the area I just want to close on, our people-to-people ties. It is our people-to-people ties which is the other bedrock of our relationship. These are the deep and growing personal ties between India and America that have been forged either through the diaspora, exchange programs, business, and so many other avenues. There are so many connections that this is yet another area where we could talk all day, but I'd just like to focus on the importance of our academic and exchange programs to our past and our future together. Now, these programs play a crucial role in helping to develop the critical thinking skills, shared experiences, and understanding that lead to the development of the deeper principles that we've been discussing today. Let's start with a story about one of the founders we mentioned earlier, Dr. Ambedkar, who spent 3 years at Columbia University in New York City. According to one recounting of his time at Columbia, the doctor said these years awakened his potential. His transcript revealed that he audited many more classes than he took for credit. Later, he would write, "The best friends I've had in my life were some of my classmates at Columbia and my great professors." Now, we are rightfully proud in the United States that one of our universities could have such a profound impact on a leader so tall. And plenty of other leaders have visited, studied, or worked in the United States on a variety of programs, including my own father, who went to the United States from Punjab in 1963 on an academic scholarship. Now, alumni of our exchange programs include Presidents Narayanan, Patil, as well as Prime Ministers Vajpayee, Indira Gandhi, Morarji Desai, and Narendra Modi. Indeed, through our Fulbright, Nehru, and International Visitors Leadership Program, and several others, more than 30,000 Americans and Indians have participated in a U.S. or Indian government-sponsored exchange program. You can add to these 30,000 over 1 lakh, that's 100,000 for those who don't know what a lakh is, that are studying on student visas at any moment. Each of these students, teachers, artists, musicians, and future leaders have been exposed to even larger numbers of people and ideas shaping their perception of the world and the way things should be. The benefits to both of our societies are innumerable. So in addition to thinking deeply about our shared values, we should also think about ways we can continue increasing our commitment to programs like these. Let me conclude with a story that starts with Anandiben Joshi. Joshi was a young woman from Maharashtra who gained admittance to the Women's College of Pennsylvania to focus on obstetrics after she herself lost a child. In 1886, at the age of 21, she returned with a hero's welcome to India as the first female Indian doctor educated in the United States. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Joshi died shortly after her return, but her legacy lives on in both name and deed. And today, the United States and India are collaborating deeply on a variety of healthcare issues. Of note are the successful programs we have to prevent child sickness and death, the issue that spurred Joshi's quest to become a doctor. For instance, epidemiologists from American and Indian Centers for Disease Control worked together on India Epidemic Intelligence Service Program. Through this cooperation, we might have finally found the source of a disease that was killing far too many children in the Muzaffarpur district of Bihar. Rotavirus is another example. Through a collaboration between our government health agencies, U.S. and Indian industry, and the Gates Foundation, India can now make an effective vaccine for rotavirus, which is affordable in India and beyond. And if used in India, and the Prime Minister has said it will be, this vaccine might save as many as 80,000 lives of Indian children under 5 each year. It was a model of research collaboration. It included intellectual property rights, respecting tech transfer, that resulted in a product that can be made in India and which saves babies from death because of diarrhea. The roots of these successful programs were sown during Joshi's studies in America. Studies that were made possible because an Indian woman crashed through all sorts of barriers, both here and in America. Studies that were made possible because of the democratic belief of free academic expression. The roots of Dr. Joshi and her colleagues sowed have blossomed into a beautiful tree of medical cooperation that is addressing some of our most difficult medical challenges. It is roots like these that form the foundation of our Strategic Plus relationship. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Congratulations. Thank you. Ambassador, thank you for those wide-ranging and thoughtful comments. My day job is or was as a journalist.
Uh-oh.
And if I were to wonder what would hit the headlines in what you said, I think it would be your comment on civil society. Would you like to elaborate on what you said?
That's why we have prepared remarks. No, look, I think what I said is reflected in the remarks. We do share so many rich traditions, especially democratic traditions. There is a rich and vibrant civil society here. There is a rich and vibrant civil society in the United States. It's up to each of our countries to determine the space that civil society has to operate. I can't make that judgment call for any third country, particularly not here. But I will tell you that the perception is one that the regulatory actions that are being taken could have a chilling effect on speech and expression. And so I think the words that I delivered today are really in a spirit of friendship and partnership, and ones where, as I say, we have to be able to talk about these issues openly and freely and face to face. I will say it is amazing how much can get done when we actually sit across the table and talk to each other. And this is a bit of a divergence from your question. But I will say, following the Prime Minister's visit to Washington in September of last year, we actually sat across the table and talked to each other on issues that we were getting really frustrated about on both sides. Both sides were frustrated on nuclear liability. Both sides were frustrated on the WTO and food security. Both sides were frustrated on intellectual property. Both sides were frustrated we couldn't announce defense co-production or co-development. The two leaders actually said, teams from the United States in your respective disciplines and expertise, sit down and talk. Sit down and discuss the equities on both sides. Surely we can come up with solutions. And that's exactly what we did in every category. So I raised this issue today in the same spirit. that when we talk to each other, that when we engage with each other, we can find a way forward.
Thank you. I have one other question before we throw this open to the floor, which is to go into an area which you have not touched upon, which is the leadership that China is taking in creating new institutions. And there is the perception that this is in part, or the support that these initiatives have got is definitely in part a result of the failure to change the norms of governance in existing global institutions. And that the frustration with not recognizing current realities is what, to some degree, is driving a new set of initiatives. Where does the US stand on this, and does it see this in the same perspective, or do you have a different perspective?
Look, I think, let me just say with regard to India and its role in global political and economic institutions, we welcome their leadership role. The President said it 5 years ago when he called for India's membership on a reformed UN Security Council. Look, the strategic bet that we have made with each other is that a strong and prosperous India and a strong and prosperous United States working together is in the best interests of the globe. And so we have very much welcomed and appreciated India's leadership role. We may not always agree, particularly on some trade issues, but we work very cooperatively from the G20 to the UN political institutions. The UN is perhaps the leader on UN peacekeeping around the world. So very, very supportive of India's role. With regard to China, China is obviously attempting to demonstrate its economic and political influence throughout not only its East Asia, but also this region as well. What we have been urging is that as China invests and as China does its transactions, that it does so with respect for the rule of law, pursuant to international norms, with respect for workers' rights, for respect for environmental issues. And that's what we have to watch carefully.
Okay, we're sticking to the 12 o'clock time?
We are, unfortunately.
Okay, so we have a little over 15 minutes and lots of hands going up. Maybe I should start from the left and move right, if that's okay. Yes, please, you.
Thank you for your remarks, Ambassador Verma. My name is Umair Ahmed. I'm with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And just following on the last point of Mr. Ninan, it's not just China's role in institutions, but China's completely changed the face of West China. That has impacts on Central Asia, Pakistan, the whole region that way. Would you like to comment on Indian-US partnerships or possible partnerships in Central Asia, maybe with reference to the international North-South trade corridor?
Look, I think the thing about the US-India relationship that I would say is that it really does stand on its own. And there's so much good and so much promise that can come of it. Look, we are now working with India in 3 African countries on development. Our scientists are now working on space cooperation. As I said, our scientists are working on medical discoveries. And on economic integration, we have been calling for more economic integration across Central Asia and across South Asia. Unfortunately, this is one of the least economically integrated and connected regions of the world. And I think the more it was connected, and there's a lot of historical and security and other reasons for that, but obviously the more it is connected, the better off I think ordinary people will be. I spoke at a conference in Calcutta a few weeks ago on regional connectivity and the spin-off benefits that it could have for just ordinary people who want better way of life. And so we will continue to make connectivity a big part of our kind of agenda, and particularly in the bilateral relationship.
Yeah, at the back there. I'll come to you.
Thank you. Ambassador, my name is Nalin Kohli. I represent a group of SME companies in IT, clean tech, and defense. And we work closely with several US companies. The sense I have during the last 15 years with trade and commerce has grown rapidly, but it is more with the big companies on both the sides, the large companies. And the institutions, whether it's the US-India Business Council or the CEO Forum, they represent mainly the large companies on both sides. So I have two inputs for you, that the states and the counties, when we go and meet them, are extremely keen to work with our SMEs. But the issues relating to immigration visas, particularly the investment visa, now it was designed in the US when people were going and seeking jobs there. We have a situation where our companies go and create jobs there. And the states tell us that this is a federal issue and it has to be tackled by the federal government. Each and every governor who visits here agrees with us. So I would request your comments on this. Thank you.
I take your point, and I think it's a good observation. I would say, look, on the number of Indian companies coming to the United States, it's been a bit of a sea change. You know, we just had a Commerce Department trade promotion conference in Washington where the president spoke. There were 82 Indian companies represented, second only to China. And it was a great demonstration of what's possible there. The fact is, Indian companies are creating hundreds of thousands of jobs in the United States. I think you're right to be out talking to the governors and to the states, just as the governors and mayors, when they come to India, they very quickly find their way around the country to forge partnerships and to attract investment into their states. On the visa issues, look, the president has been pushing for comprehensive reform of our immigration system, including the visa system. All I would say is that India continues to get the most H-1B visas of any country in the world. 65% of all H-1Bs are issued to Indian nationals. 35% of all L-1s, or intra-company transferred, are issued to Indians. At the US Embassy and our consulates, we issued over 1 million visas last year. We are up 40% increase just in the first 4 months. I don't see that number going down. But I take your point about the need to coordinate between what the federal government is saying and what the state governments are saying.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Ambassador, my name is Rohit. Maritime ambitions. Do you see in the next 15 years or so the balance of power shifting in Asia, and what will be the US strategy in the context of the Indo-US strategic plus partnership of countering the rising power of China?
You promised easy questions here. Look, here's what I would say, and you know, as I said, our relationship with India stands on its own. What has struck me is that the U.S.-China relationship and the India-China relationship has a lot of similarities. When I hear government officials here in India talk about how the elements of the relationship have both cooperation and competition, that sounds strikingly familiar to what US government officials would say, but it's also very true. We're economically intertwined. There are economic connections across America and China, across India and China. When we have human rights concerns, we raise them. When we have security concerns, we raise them. And I am relieved, frankly, to see the extent of the cooperation, the extent of the dialogue between India and China on these sets of issues, and that's exactly what should happen, and that's a good thing. I think, as I will just say what Secretary Kerry and the President have said before, which is we welcome the peaceful rise of China. That China that plays by international norms and rules. And at the same time, we very much have a rebalance to the Asia-Pacific. India has an Act East policy where we are focusing our attention and efforts where the most people are, the most trade is, the most opportunities are, potentially threats as well. But that's where the future is. And this is not in an effort to contain or constrain China. Frankly, it is, as I said before, it is an indication of what's possible in this democratic post-World War II rules-based system. And China and India and the United States are two great examples, and now two great protectors of that system.
Okay, I'm going to have to move this way because otherwise time's going to run out over here. Yes, the lady in front.
Hello, I am Dr. Ghazala Javed from Ministry of Ayush. First of all, our secretary, Shri Nilanjan Sainal, was invited over here. He couldn't come, but he has conveyed his warm regards.
Thank you.
Ayush, Mr. Ambassador, is an acronym for Ayurveda, Yoga and Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, Sowa, Rigpa, and Homeopathy. These are the recognized Indian system of medicine. So, sir, you spoke about yoga. You spoke about Gandhiji. He was a strong believer in Indian system of medicine. And since the last time when Honorable Prime Minister of India...
Can you ask your question, please?
Yeah, that's what I'm coming to. We are having quite active dialogue in the field of traditional system of medicine. Recently, secretary-led delegation has gone and had meeting with Department of Human Health and Service, National Institute of Health, and Ambassador Decharge, Madam Kathleen, has also visited Faculty of Ayurveda in Banaras Hindu University. So, Mr. Ambassador, what is your view in the bilateral dialogue which we are having at government-to-government level in the field of Indian traditional system of medicine?
Look, I think health is a huge area of cooperation for us, huge area of cooperation for us. India produces some of the best doctors and medical professionals and scientists and researchers in the world, as does the United States. And so there's so much potential here, and I'm excited about the growth of our dialogue, including on traditional medicines and on alternative therapies that India has been known for. And I believe our government officials, as you just said, had a dialogue on those subjects, and so we would look forward to that in the future.
Okay, the gentleman immediately behind.
Thank you, Mr. Nayan. I'm Prakash Narayan, retired as chairman of the Railway Board and Secretary Shipping and Transport and so on. But I'm asking you a question just now as a humanist. I work for the International Humanist Movement, and I'm a member of their Policy Commission. You mentioned about the American Constitution and our Constitution, how similar they were, how similar our values of founding fathers were. And we always quote the American experiment in living is one of the most successful ones as far as compassion is concerned. We don't always agree with everything, but there is a great deal which we like, and we as secular Democrats quote you. We stand for democracy, as you said. We also stand for secular democracy. And
Mr. Ram, can you ask the question, please?
My problem is that while we quote you, there is one area in which we get frustrated in your country, which is actually secular, but there are certain things which remain there. In God we trust is still on your coin. And we are therefore get slightly frustrated when we try to promote secular values by quoting the example America. Is something being done about that? You agree it is not fair. Now the atheists have as much right to live in this world.
I think I'll take a couple of more questions over here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
I'd request you to be brief and ask your question quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, give me half a minute. Your Excellency, last time we met, I shared with you the story of Einstein and his question paper at Taj Palace, if you remember. This time it is inspired by your father's immigration story. I would like to introduce Penderel Moon. Penderel Moon was Deputy Commissioner of Amritsar, and he wrote many novels and books, and one was Strangers in India. He castigated Englishmen who lived in India but never appreciated to mix with them, you see. And he stayed back after 47 partition in Delhi because he was in love with a Punjabi married Punjabi girl. And soon, you know, he married Pauline Barnes, who divorced her diplomat husband and married him in London. And the marriage didn't last long.
You know, we have very limited time.
Last sentence.
So I think we can't go into this rimbo.
Last sentence, one sentence. Kushwant Singh based his novel, you know, I Can't Hear the Nightingale on this character.
If you don't have a question...
He says the moral of the story is, he says, don't love one woman and marry another. Don't live in one country and love another country. I think your father was spot on when he looked for, that is multiculturalism is any day better than diverse culture.
Okay, I request you, anyone to coming in, please be brief and just ask a question. Yeah.
Thank you. Neelam Matthews, AIN of the US. A quick question, and that is your thoughts on defense and IPR. Is it holding back transfer of technology? And what's the roadmap for DTTI? Thank you.
Thanks for us. Did you say defense and IPR?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So look, I think defense and security cooperation is a pillar of our relationship. And it will continue to be a pillar of our relationship. What we're doing on military exercises, what we're doing on training, what we're doing on our partnership with our national defense universities. I had the really, really good fortune 3 weeks ago of going to Kochi and going out to the USS Carl Vinson, which is one of our very famous aircraft carriers. Now that would be interesting in and of itself, but I went with 10 Indian naval aviators who spent several hours on the aircraft carrier, meeting with the admiral who was there, meeting with the captain of the ship, walking around the ship, taking notes about how we do things. We were asking questions about how the Indians do things on their aircraft carrier. Frankly, for me, it was a glimpse into the future of what's possible and the great promise that exists just in maritime cooperation. On DTTI, I think you know we've announced 6 what we call Pathfinder projects. I think we've made very good progress. We're very much looking forward to the visit of the Secretary of Defense coming up in a few weeks. And, you know, but I will say DTTI is about helping to co-develop and co-produce. And I wouldn't limit our thinking to just these 6. And I'll just say one quick thing, which is when I was at the Aero India show in Bangalore, there were 63 American companies there, and all the big defense folks were there, but there were dozens of small American companies. And I would go up to the booth and I would say, what are you doing? What are you working on? And they would say, well, I'm doing co-production with our Indian counterpart, or I'm providing the sub-assembly for this sophisticated aircraft part going into an Indian plane, or I'm doing the advanced metalworking in Philadelphia that will then be sent to the Indian helicopter maker. These example after example, all of which are examples of co-production and co-development. So I don't think we should limit our thinking to just 6 projects. DTTI is really a philosophy about working together, our 2 great defense industries actually working together, sharing technology. Intellectual property, of course, it's a issue that we discuss all the time. I would like to say through the Trade Policy Forum and other mechanisms, it's getting better.
Thank you. Gentleman in the back, yeah.
American citizens died during 26/11. Now Lakvi has been released. What is the American government going to say to Pakistan about Lakvi's being released on bail?
Well, we've already said it, and the Secretary of State has already said it, and he said it very forcefully, that it was a mistake and that the perpetrators of the Mumbai attacks need to be held fully accountable. That's been the U.S. policy. It will continue to be the U.S. policy. And more than that, when the President was here with the Prime Minister, there was an unequivocal joint statement on condemning terrorism globally and to standing up against safe havens and to rooting out this scourge of terrorism. So we're very much on record as being opposed to the Lock v. release.
Okay, I know there are a lot of hands, but there's just time for one question, and I'll go there for that and close with that because we are almost into 12 o'clock. Yes, please.
Natalie Obiko-Pearson from Bloomberg News. I have a question about India's plans to invest in an Iranian port. The shipping minister is in Tehran today and expected to make that announcement. Of course, that would come ahead of the lifting of US-led sanctions and before we know whether we're going to arrive at a comprehensive nuclear agreement. Does the US have a position on such investments?
Yeah, I think, our Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs was here last week, who happens to also be our lead negotiator in the Iran P5+1 talks. So if anyone was prepared to talk about this issue, she was. And I think, I'd just say the importance of maintaining the international coalition of sanctions and maintain, as I think she said, sanctions won't solve the problem, but they certainly will continue to bring Iran to a final agreement that everyone is working hard on, very, very aggressively on both sides. The US and India share a common view opposed to a nuclear weapon being developed by the Iranians. And so the message that we would deliver, not just to India, but to others that are thinking of rushing in to investments, is that the deal is not final, and we have to wait and see to ensure that we get to a final deal to maintain the international solidarity that has brought this hard-fought diplomatic victory, but we're not over the finish line yet.
Thank you. I'm afraid I know there are lots of people who wanted to ask questions and come into this discussion, but time has run out. And so you'll have to forgive me for calling this session to a close. I want to thank Ambassador Verma for having taken time out to come here, be with us, and share his thoughts with us. I cannot possibly summarize the wide range of issues that have cropped up this morning. But I do want to thank everybody else also who's present for being here and for taking part in our programs, and to say that, Ambassador, we would like to welcome you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Let me just say thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the leadership that you and Kiran have provided to this important organization. And thank you for all the engagement and that you give to our embassy each day and to our team. So thank you. I'm happy to talk to you as we move out here. Thank you very much.